Boarding Flight 305. It's late afternoon, November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving. America is buzzing with anticipation. Airports hum with the energy of holiday travel parents, wrangling children, businessmen rushing to make their flights, couples carrying small gifts wrapped in shiny paper. At Portland International Airport, the air is thick with cigarette smoke and the faint aroma of percolated coffee. Back then, smoking wasn't just tolerated, it was expected. Ashtrays dotted the terminal, and passengers lit up while waiting for their boarding calls. You walk through the concourse noticing how different it feels compared to today's heavily guarded checkpoints. No TSA, no scanners, no taking off your shoes. You could stroll right to the gate with a paper ticket in hand, bought with cash if you pleased. And one man did exactly that. He looks ordinary enough at first glance. Mid-40s, maybe early 50s. About 6 feet tall average, build, neatly dressed in a business suit, dark jacket, white shirt, narrow black tie, pinned with a mother-of-pearl clip. A felt hat shades his features, though he carries it casually rather than low over his face. He doesn't fidget, doesn't pace. He moves with the unhurried confidence of a man who has nowhere urgent to be, even as travelers around him bustle toward their flights. In his hand is a plain black briefcase, the kind that seems to hum with anonymity. Square edges, scuffed leather metal latches polished with use. The kind of case that could hold accounting ledgers, sales contracts, or, as he will soon claim, something far more dangerous. At the gate, he hands the agent a $20 bill for a one-way ticket to Seattle. That's it. No ID check, no metal detectors, just a cash purchase, a polite nod, and he's waved through. His name written on the passenger manifest is Dan Cooper, a name that means little now, but will echo for decades. The plane is Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a Boeing 727, scheduled for the short hop north, barely 30 minutes of airtime. Inside the cabin is modest by modern standards. The 727 is a narrow-bodied jet, 3 seats to a side, with overhead bins that look like simple shelves rather than lidded compartments. The hum of engines filters faintly through the fuselage, and the scent of jet fuel mixes with cigarette smoke. The plane carries 36 passengers and a crew of 6, an ordinary load for the holiday eve. Cooper chooses seat 18C near the rear aisle side. From here, he has a good view of the cabin and the stewardesses moving up and down the aisle. He lights a cigarette Camels, according to some witnesses, and orders a bourbon and soda. Imagine that alcohol served in glassware ice cubes, clinking a briefcase resting calmly at his side. To everyone else, he's just another businessman on another routine flight. But historians point out that his choice of plane may not have been accidental. The Boeing 727 had a unique feature, a rear airstair beneath the tail which could be lowered in flight. Few passengers even knew about it, but Cooper did. Later, investigators would speculate that he chose this aircraft precisely for that reason, because it offered an escape route no other commercial jet could match. Was he a pilot? A paratrooper, someone with insider knowledge? Scholars still debate it. For now, though, he plays the part of an unremarkable traveler. His demeanor is calm, his voice low when he speaks. He doesn't chat with the other passengers. He doesn't draw attention. The only notable thing about him is how unnotable he is, like a shadow dressed in polite clothing. One quirky detail often overlooked Cooper's order. Bourbon and soda served before takeoff casually sipped as the engines roar to life. Later reports suggest he even smoked through much of the flight, calmly exhaling rings of smoke while plotting something that would shake aviation history. It's such an oddly civilized image, a hijacker drinking whiskey mid-air as if waiting for a business meeting to start. The plane taxi's engines spooling. Outside, rain slicks the runway. November gloom draping the Pacific Northwest in shades of gray. Passengers flip through magazines, adjust their coats, settle in for the brief journey. The cabin shudders as the jet gathers speed, then lifts into the sky. Portland slips away beneath them. Seattle awaits. And in row 18, seat C, Dan Cooper prepares to alter history. He carries a folded piece of paper in his pocket. Just a note, ordinary stationery, but on it are words that will change this flight from routine to infamous. For now, though, it remains hidden. He sips his bourbon, smokes his cigarette, and watches the stewardesses move about their work. Historians still puzzle over this calm. Was he nervous beneath the surface? Did his heart race as the plane leveled out? Or was he exactly as he appeared, composed, polite, oddly professional in his intentions? We can only imagine. What we know is this: within minutes that folded note will be handed to a flight attendant, and with it a story will begin, a story that has never truly ended. The Hijack Note. The Boeing 727 levels off engines, settling into a steady drone. The cabin crew begins their routine, checking seatbelts, passing out magazines, offering drinks. Outside, the November sky hangs heavy clouds, thick with drizzle. Inside, it's just another short hop between Portland and Seattle. The kind of flight so ordinary you'd forget it the moment you landed. But not this time. From seat 18C, the man called Dan Cooper presses his call button. A stewardess, Florence Schaffner, walks down the aisle, her professional smile steady, though she's already had a long day. He looks polite, even a bit reserved, when he hands her a folded piece of paper. She accepts it with practiced ease, sliding it unopened into her pocket. Notes from male passengers were nothing unusual, phone numbers, invitations to drinks, the kind of attention flight attendants endured daily in the 1970s. But this note is different. Cooper leans closer, his voice low but firm. "Miss, you'd better read that note. I have a bomb." Imagine the chill that must have swept through her. She unfolds the paper, her eyes scanning quickly. The handwriting is neat, unhurried. It states simply and clearly that he has an explosive device in his briefcase, that she must sit beside him, that she must listen carefully because lives depend on it. Her instincts tell her not to argue. She slides into the empty seat beside him, her pulse hammering. Cooper lifts his briefcase just enough to show her what lies inside: red cylinders, wires, batteries, an arrangement that looks convincingly lethal. Whether real dynamite or a clever fake, it's enough to terrify. She doesn't want to find out. Calmly, Cooper begins to dictate his demands. He wants $200,000 in cash. The bills must be in $20 denominations, unmarked negotiable currency. He wants 4 parachutes, 2 front, 2 back. And when the plane lands in Seattle, he wants a fuel truck waiting so they can fly again, this time to Mexico City. It's not just the amount of money that startles her, it's the detail. The specificity suggests a man who has thought this through, perhaps even rehearsed it. 4 parachutes, not 1. Mexico City, not some vague tropical escape. He knows what he wants, and he knows how to ask for it. Florence relays the message to the cockpit. The captain listens tight-lipped as she explains. He informs air traffic control. Word spreads quickly to the FAA, then to the FBI. On the ground, a crisis team scrambles to respond. They have less than half an hour to prepare for what may be the most audacious crime in U.S. aviation history. Meanwhile, the passengers remain blissfully unaware. They sip their sodas, read their newspapers, and glance out the windows at the gray Pacific Northwest sky. To them, this is just a delayed commuter flight. The captain makes an announcement about a minor mechanical difficulty requiring extra time before landing. No one suspects that in the back row, a man with a cigarette and a bourbon is calmly planning an aerial heist. Here's a quirky tidbit. Cooper doesn't lose his composure. He speaks politely, uses please and thank you, and treats the stewardesses with respect. He even offers to pay for his drink. One attendant later recalled that he seemed thoughtful, not nervous, as though he were a businessman finalizing a deal rather than threatening dozens of lives. That paradox, the polite hijacker, is part of why the story stuck in the collective imagination. Still, the weight of his words lingers. A bomb on board, a ransom demand, parachutes. The crew realize that they are now part of something unprecedented. Skyjackings had occurred before, especially in the chaotic 1960s and early 1970s, when hijackers often forced planes to Cuba, but never one quite like this. This man isn't looking for political asylum or to make a statement. He wants money parachutes and an escape into the night. Historians still argue about his mindset. Was Cooper a professional thief with military training, an amateur thrill-seeker with nothing to lose, or something stranger, a man chasing freedom in its most dangerous form? No psychological profile has ever fully explained him. Florence, caught in the middle, does what she can to remain steady. She glances at his tie clip, the glint of mother-of-pearl, notices how carefully he smokes, tapping the ash into the tray, how he sips his bourbon without hurry. Every detail lodges in her memory, details she'll later repeat endlessly to investigators. Up front, the captain weighs options. A storm of thoughts churns: keep the passengers calm, comply with the hijacker, buy time for authorities. The crew agrees they will follow his instructions, at least for now. And so with that note, the flight has changed course, not in heading, but in destiny. The passengers continue to laugh, yawn, and stretch in their seats, unaware that their flight is now part of a story that will outlive them all. Only a handful of people know the truth. A man with a bomb has just seized control of Flight 305, and the world will never forget his name, though not the one he chose. The press will later misreport it. Instead of Dan Cooper, they'll call him D.B. Cooper, a simple clerical error that transforms a name into a legend, one that still echoes half a century later. Negotiations in the sky. The plane levels out as it heads north, engines humming in a steady rhythm. To the passengers, it feels like the kind of uneventful commuter flight that fills holiday weekends. A few flip through magazines, others sip their drinks, and a child in row 6 presses his nose against the window to watch the clouds roll beneath the wings. But behind the curtain that separates passengers from crew, the mood is very different. Florence Schaffner, still rattled from the bomb threat relays, Cooper's demands to Captain William Scott. He listens intently, brow furrowed, and then sends the information forward via radio. On the ground, controllers scramble to alert law enforcement. In minutes, the FBI field office in Seattle is on high alert, already planning their response. And all the while, Cooper sits calmly in 18C, cigarette-glowing bourbon glass, half full. His list of demands is precise: $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck waiting on arrival in Seattle. He makes it clear there will be no negotiation, no bargaining. Either the crew delivers, or he will detonate the bomb he claims to have. It's worth pausing here to consider the era. The early 1970s saw a rash of hijackings, many politically motivated, often aimed at diverting flights to Cuba. But Cooper's plan feels different. He's not spouting ideology, not making speeches. He isn't interested in attention or a cause. He wants cash, and he wants a way out. His cool demeanor, his polite tone, even his requests for bourbon, all suggest a man in control of himself and the situation. The captain makes a decision: comply. The safety of the passengers comes first, and besides, there is no obvious way to overpower Cooper without risking lives. He orders the plane to circle Puget Sound, burning time in the air, while law enforcement gathers the ransom. For nearly 2 hours the plane loops silently above Seattle, its passengers told only that there is a minor mechanical issue delaying their arrival. Back in the cabin, the stewardesses serve drinks, reassure nervous flyers, and keep the atmosphere calm. Cooper watches, seemingly relaxed, but always aware. He insists Florence sit near him, passing notes to the cockpit when needed. She notices how measured he is, how little wasted motion he makes. He writes neatly, no tremble in his hands. He smokes down each cigarette with the patience of a man who has all the time in the world. And then there's the detail of the parachutes. 4, not 1. Authorities are baffled by this. If he planned to jump alone, why ask for so many? Was he bluffing, suggesting he might take a hostage with him? Was he trying to confuse the investigators, forcing them to provide real functional gear rather than sabotaged equipment? Scholars still debate the reasoning, and it remains one of the stranger twists of the plan. Meanwhile, FBI agents in Seattle rush to prepare. They contact a local bank to assemble the ransom $200,000 in unmarked $20 bills, serial numbers logged for later tracking. The parachutes are borrowed hastily from a nearby skydiving school and a local flight club. It's a logistical scramble, but one carried out with astonishing speed considering the stakes. Inside the cabin, though, none of this is visible. Cooper continues his odd balancing act, threatening mass murder with one hand and projecting politeness with the other. When Florence expresses nervousness, he tells her gently not to worry, that everything will be fine if his demands are met. When another stewardess brings him a second drink, he accepts with a nod and thanks her. One quirky anecdote, he even offers to pay his bar tab. Imagine that an alleged hijacker holding a bomb in his briefcase, yet reaching into his pocket for small bills to cover the cost of his bourbon. It's absurd, almost cinematic, and yet it's documented by the crew. That kind of politeness, that calm civility, is part of what transformed him into a legend rather than just another criminal. The hours drag on. Outside the windows, Seattle twinkles faintly beneath a heavy curtain of clouds. Passengers grow restless, but not alarmed. They believe the fiction of mechanical trouble. One day they'll discover how close they came to history. For now, they simply tighten their seatbelts and wait. Up in the cockpit, the tension is thicker. Captain Scott, First Officer Rotadzak, and Flight Engineer Anderson keep their eyes on the dials, their ears on the radio, waiting for confirmation from the ground that the ransom is ready. The storm builds in their minds. How will this end? Will the man in 18C really let them go once he has his money, or will this turn bloody? Historians still argue whether Cooper's calmness was genuine confidence or a mask for desperation. Some say he must have been trained his precise flight instructions, his knowledge of the 727's features, his unflappable demeanor. Others insist he could have been a reckless amateur gambling his life on bravado. The truth, like so much in this story, remains unresolved. But one thing is certain: as the plane circles endlessly in the night sky, Dan Cooper has seized complete control. 36 passengers sit unaware of the drama playing out above their heads. 6 crew members follow every instruction to the letter, and on the ground the FBI scrambles to meet his demands, praying they can outthink him later. By the time the plane begins its descent into Seattle, everything is in motion. The ransom is ready. The parachutes are waiting. And a line has been crossed from polite demands scribbled on a note to an unfolding drama that will soon become one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. The Ransom Exchange. The circling ends. After hours aloft, Northwest Orient Flight 305 is finally cleared to land at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Night has already fallen. The Pacific Northwest sky is a sheet of drizzle and mist raindrops streaking across the cabin windows like nervous tears. Down below the runway gleams under floodlights, and beyond it, hidden from the passenger's view, waits a swarm of law enforcement officers, federal agents, and airport personnel, all eager to outmaneuver the man who has kept them guessing for hours. Inside the cockpit, Captain Scott listens carefully as Seattle Tower relays instructions. Cooper has been clear: no tricks, no snipers, no sudden moves. The lights inside the cabin are dimmed at his request, the window shades drawn. The jet glides down, tires shrieking against wet concrete as it touches the runway at 5:45 p.m. Relief sweeps over the passengers. They believe they are landing because of a mechanical delay, as they were told. They don't realize they are pawns in a high-stakes exchange about to unfold. The aircraft rolls to a remote corner of the tarmac away from the terminal. Law enforcement keeps its distance. Cooper has warned that if he sees anything suspicious, men with rifles, cars approaching too close, the consequences will be catastrophic. Whether his briefcase truly contains dynamite or not, no one dares test him. From the window of seat 18C, Cooper watches the preparations. A ground vehicle approaches slowly, its headlights cutting through the rain. Inside is a man carrying a bulky canvas bag, his ransom. The money has been hastily assembled from banks across the city, $200, $1,000 in small used bills. Every serial number has been photographed for the FBI's records, ensuring that any future appearance of the bills could be traced. It's a mix of old and new notes stacked into bundles of 100 secured with rubber bands, stuffed into the bag like a makeshift treasure chest. Alongside the cash are 4 parachutes, 2 main, 2 reserve, collected in a scramble from local flight schools and skydiving clubs. Their condition is not pristine. One of the reserves is even a practice chute sewn shut. But Cooper doesn't know that yet, and the FBI is careful not to tip their hand. The moment comes. The rear door of the plane opens briefly. Ground crew pass the money and parachutes inside. Cooper inspects them with cool precision. He thumbs through the cash, just enough to verify it's real. He checks the parachutes one by one, eyes scanning straps, buckles, cords. Satisfied, he nods. Now it's his turn to keep a promise the passengers. He instructs the crew to let them go. The cabin door opens and 36 weary travelers file down the stairs into the drizzle, escorted across the tarmac by waiting officials. Most look confused, some irritated, but none have any idea how close they came to history. Later, when the news breaks, they'll be stunned to realize they were part of the only unsolved skyjacking in American history. For now, they simply breathe fresh night air and feel relief that their mechanical issue is over. The plane is quieter now. Only the essential crew remain: the captain, first officer, flight engineer, and 2 stewardesses. Cooper sits calmly in the dim light cigarette smoke, curling above him, the bag of money at his feet, the parachutes stacked beside him. The tension is still there, but oddly it's muted. He seems more like a man preparing for a trip than a desperate criminal. One quirky moment, Cooper insists on ordering another bourbon during the exchange. Think about that: outside agents with rifles crouch in the shadows, the FBI is holding its breath, and inside he's sipping whiskey unfazed. It's almost theatrical, like he's playing a role he rehearsed countless times. By 7:40 p.m. the aircraft has refueled. Cooper lays out his final instructions. The flight will head south toward Mexico City. It must fly low 10,000 feet and slow about 200 knots. The landing gear will stay down the cabin unpressurized and the flaps at 15 degrees. These conditions are far from efficient for long-distance travel, but they are perfect for something else: parachuting. Historians note that Cooper's demands revealed knowledge of aviation beyond that of a casual traveler. Was he former military paratrooper from Vietnam, an airline insider, or had he simply done obsessive research? Scholars still debate it, pointing out that few hijackers of the era demonstrated such technical savvy. As the crew prepares for takeoff, unease ripples through them. They suspect what Cooper is planning. Why else ask for parachutes? Why else demand a low, slow flight path? The Boeing 727's rear stairs, a rarely used feature, suddenly loom in their minds. Could he really intend to leap into the night? Yet they follow his orders. The engines roar once more, the jet rolling down the slick runway water, spraying from its tires. The nose lifts, and Flight 305 climbs into the stormy skies once again. The passengers are gone, the ransom is aboard, and the world waits below to see what happens next. In the dimly lit cabin, Dan Cooper, alias Stranger, myth in the making, sits alone with his loot and his parachutes. The air feels charged like the calm before lightning. Somewhere in the darkness ahead lies the next chapter, a leap into legend. The Boeing 727 climbs into the rainy night, leaving Seattle behind. It's 7:40 p.m., the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and the air outside is turbulent. Wind lashes against the fuselage, rain streaks the windows, and thunder growls faintly in the distance. Inside the cockpit, Captain William Scott and his crew follow Cooper's meticulous instructions: 10,000 feet altitude, 200 knots, speed landing gear, down cabin unpressurized flaps set at 15 degrees. The plane groans under these unusual conditions, but it holds steady, plowing south toward Mexico. Behind them, in the dimly lit cabin, Dan Cooper sits surrounded by the tools of his escape, a bag stuffed with $200,000 in $20 bills and 4 parachutes stacked neatly beside him. The passengers are gone. The only people left on board are the pilots, the flight engineer, and 2 stewardesses. Cooper has dismissed one attendant to sit in the cockpit with the others, leaving only Tina Mucklow in the cabin with him. She notices the strange duality of the man, calm, polite, even gentle in tone, yet exuding a control that leaves no doubt he means every word. At one point he tells her to retrieve the instruction manual for the airstairs, asking her how to deploy them mid-flight. She insists she doesn't know how. He seems to study the mechanism himself, unflustered. When she looks at him too long, he gives a half-smile and asks her to move forward to the cockpit. Before she goes, he hands her a final instruction for the pilots: keep the plane steady, maintain the heading, and leave him alone. She joins the others in the cockpit. The door closes. Now Cooper is alone with his money, his parachutes, and the howl of wind outside. What happens next is partly recorded, partly guessed. At 8:13 p.m., the crew feel a sudden jolt, a pressure change that rocks the aircraft. The aft stairway indicator flickers. They know what it means. Cooper has opened the rear stairs. Imagine the scene, the roar of the wind flooding the cabin, the freezing November air, rushing in papers, scattering like startled birds. Cooper hefts the heavy bag of money straps on one of the parachutes and steps toward the open stairs. Below him lies a vast wilderness of pine forests, rivers, and rugged terrain, dark, wet, hostile. Somewhere beneath the stormy sky, the ground waits indifferent to whether he lands alive or dead. He pauses, perhaps, to take one last drag from his cigarette. Maybe he adjusts his tie clip, that gleam of mother-of-pearl now meaningless in the chaos. And then, with a leap into history, he jumps. The crew in the cockpit feel another bump as the stairs shift under his weight. Then silence. No radio call, no parachute sighting, no sign of where he landed. Just the endless darkness of Washington state swallowing him whole. The 727 continues to Reno, where it lands hours later with FBI agents waiting. They storm the plane, weapons drawn only to find exactly what the crew already knew: Cooper is gone. The aft stairs hang open, wet with rain, leading to nothing but empty sky. Historians and aviation experts have argued endlessly about the odds of survival. On one hand, Cooper's knowledge of the 727's quirks suggests training. His calm demeanor implies preparation. But the conditions that night were brutal: freezing rain, gusting winds, pitch-black terrain, with no lights to guide a descent. Survival seemed unlikely without specialized gear. He wore only a business suit, thin loafers, and a trench coat, not exactly skydiving attire. Quirky detail, he even declined the airline's offer of military parachutes, insisting on civilian ones. One of the reserves was actually sewn shut, a non-functional dummy, yet he accepted the lot. Was he confident enough to risk faulty gear, or did he not notice the decoy? To this day, no one is sure. Another debate: the money bag. At 20 pounds, it would have been cumbersome in freefall. Did he tie it to himself? Did it break loose, scattering bills across the forest? Was it found later by animals, hunters, or rivers? Only one fragment of the loot will ever turn up years later on the banks of the Columbia River. The FBI launched a massive manhunt that night, converging on the suspected drop zone near Ariel, Washington. Helicopters, dogs, and armed searchers scoured the terrain, braving the storm. They found nothing, no parachute, no body, no bag, not even a shoe. It was as if Cooper had been erased by the storm itself. And that's the paradox of this chapter. A man leaps from a plane into one of the most inhospitable nights imaginable. Logic says he should have died within minutes, broken bones on impact hypothermia from the cold disorientation in the dark. Yet the complete absence of evidence suggests something else. Maybe he lived. Maybe he walked out of that forest soggy and battered but alive and vanished into anonymity forever. Historians still argue whether Cooper's escape was brilliant or suicidal. Some say his jump was so reckless that survival was nearly impossible. Others insist his precision, his chosen aircraft, his parachute demands his calm demeanor, points to someone who knew exactly what he was doing. But what everyone agrees on is this: in that moment, as he stepped off the stairs into the void, D.B. Cooper became legend. The morning after Thanksgiving, November 25, 1971, much of the nation woke up to headlines about a bizarre mid-air heist. A man had hijacked a commercial jet, demanded $200,000 in parachutes, and then leapt into the stormy night sky somewhere over Washington state. By sunrise, the FBI had already mobilized one of the most extensive manhunts in American history. Agents converged on the suspected drop zone, a rugged swath of forest near Ariel, Washington, marked by dense pine trees, rivers cutting through valleys and hills slick with November rain. Helicopters circled above their spotlights, sweeping across treetops. Ground teams spread out with dogs, radios crackling as they scoured the wilderness. The challenge was immense. Cooper had vanished into some of the most unforgiving terrain in the Pacific Northwest on one of the worst weather nights imaginable. From the beginning, investigators faced a paradox: they had too much to chase and too little to hold on to. The Boeing 727's flight path gave only a rough estimate of where Cooper might have jumped. The storm distorted radar readings. The crew could only say they felt a pressure bump around 8:13 p.m., suggesting he exited then, but not pinpointing exactly where. That left a search zone stretching over miles of forest and farmland, and the wilderness itself seemed to conspire against them. Rain had washed away potential footprints. Rivers swelled ready to carry away any trace of a parachute or body. Wildlife roamed freely, capable of disturbing evidence. After days of searching, the FBI found nothing: no parachute, no money, no corpse. It was as though the storm had swallowed him whole. Back in Seattle, agents began the other half of the investigation interviews. They questioned passengers and crew, carefully collecting every detail of Cooper's appearance and behavior. His description emerged clearly: a white male in his mid-40s, about 6 feet tall, wearing a dark suit, white shirt, black tie, and carrying a black briefcase. His hair was dark, neatly cut, his demeanor polite, his voice calm. He smoked Raleigh cigarettes, drank bourbon and soda, and never once raised his voice. Florence Schaffner, who had received his hijack note, recalled his meticulous handwriting and steady hand. Tina Mucklow described his unusual composure even when asking about the airstairs. The crew agreed on one unsettling fact: he seemed to know far too much about the 727's mechanics. His instructions for speed, altitude, and flap settings were so precise that investigators suspected aviation or military experience. The FBI quickly considered military parachutists as possible suspects. Thousands of men had returned from Vietnam with airborne training, and Cooper's cool demeanor seemed to fit the profile of a veteran. Yet the lack of survival gear puzzled them. Who jumps into a freezing November night in loafers and a business suit? Was he truly skilled or a reckless amateur who died in the attempt? Over the next weeks, tips poured in from across the country. Anyone with a shady past and airborne skills became a suspect. Hundreds of names filled the FBI's files. Agents interviewed ex-convicts, Army paratroopers, even eccentric loners with reputations for wild schemes. But every lead either collapsed under scrutiny or left too many gaps to close. Quirky detail. At one point, the FBI even tried to replicate the jump using a 727 and volunteer paratroopers. They confirmed it was possible, though perilous. The plane's rear stairs could indeed be lowered mid-flight, and a jumper could exit safely under certain conditions. The test only deepened the mystery. If Cooper had the knowledge to request such a maneuver, maybe he had the skills to survive. Public fascination grew as the FBI struggled. Newspapers splashed the story across their front pages. Late-night talk shows cracked jokes about the gentleman hijacker. The press error that changed Dan Cooper into D.B. Cooper stuck, giving the fugitive a catchy, almost comic book alias. Instead of fading into obscurity, Cooper became folklore overnight. The FBI tried to cut through the noise. They tracked the ransom money, circulating the serial numbers to banks, casinos, and retailers across the country. Agents checked every suspicious cash deposit, yet the bills never surfaced. Not a single ransom note was spotted in circulation. Either Cooper had hidden the money with incredible care, or he hadn't survived to spend it. And that was the haunting dilemma. Logic suggested he might have perished. The jump zone was brutal, the weather merciless, the equipment less than ideal. But the absence of a body parachute or gear gnawed at investigators. Usually, nature leaves something behind. A shred of fabric, a skeleton years later, a clue washed downstream. But Cooper left nothing. Historians still argue about this stage of the hunt. Was the FBI too confident he had died and so missed leads pointing to a living Cooper? Or did they chase too many false trails, wasting energy on impossible theories? Either way, the manhunt consumed years and millions of dollars, and the result was the same silence. By Christmas of 1971, the search had slowed. By spring of 1972, it was clear if Cooper was alive, he had vanished successfully. If he was dead, the forest had claimed him completely. Either way, the manhunt had turned from an active chase into a long, frustrating wait, and that wait, like the silence of the storm, stretched on. The money in the sand. For nearly a decade, silence ruled. The FBI pursued leads, combed through suspects, and tracked serial numbers, but the trail was cold. Then, in February 1980, the story roared back to life in the most unexpected way. It began with an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram vacationing with his family near the Columbia River. They were picnicking along Tena Bar, a sandy stretch about 20 miles downstream from Vancouver, Washington. As Brian dug into the sand, his small hands uncovered something odd. Bundles of decaying $20 bills clumped together, edges rotting but still recognizable. At first it must have looked like treasure a child's fantasy come true. But when his parents examined the find, they realized this wasn't just lost cash. These were bills from the most famous ransom in American history. Serial numbers confirmed it. The money belonged to D.B. Cooper. The total came to $5,800, a tiny fraction of the $200,000 stolen nearly 9 years earlier. Yet it was enough to reignite the mystery. After years of silence, here was physical evidence money Cooper had carried into the night. The FBI rushed to investigate. How had the bills ended up here buried in sand along the Columbia River? The spot was well outside the presumed drop zone. Forensic experts analyzed the bundles, noting how the rubber bands had decayed, how the bills were clumped. It appeared the money had been submerged in water at some point before being buried in the sand. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered. Did Cooper survive the jump and hide the money only for it to wash downstream later? Did he perish in the wilderness and the cash slipped from his bag into a river? Or, as some theorists suggest, did someone else plant the money deliberately to confuse investigators? Historians still argue about this. Some point to the sediment patterns at Tena Bar, suggesting the bills were carried downstream by floods naturally deposited where they were found. Others insist the burial looked too deliberate, that someone must have placed them there by hand. The quirkiest twist: no other bills from the ransom have ever surfaced. Despite serial numbers being widely distributed, not a single other note has turned up in circulation, pawn shops, banks, or casinos. Just those 3 decaying bundles in the sand. For the FBI, the discovery was maddening. On one hand, it proved Cooper, or at least his loot, had made it out of the plane. On the other, it pushed the mystery further into ambiguity. If the money reached the river, did Cooper reach safety, or did the Columbia claim both him and his prize? Speculation flourished. Some believed Cooper drowned, his body swept away, leaving only fragments of his ransom behind. Others painted a more dramatic picture, Cooper escaping successfully, spending part of the money in secret, then hiding or discarding the rest to mislead investigators. The Ingram family, meanwhile, had to navigate their own odd fame. The FBI took most of the bills as evidence, but allowed a small portion to be kept by the family years later. Brian Ingram would eventually auction some of the fragments as collectibles, pieces of one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. And the public, they couldn't get enough. Newspapers splashed photographs of the rotted bundles across their pages. TV anchors speculated breathlessly. Amateur sleuths spun theories late into the night. The legend of D.B. Cooper had been reignited, his name once again on the lips of millions. But after the excitement faded, reality returned: no body, no parachute, no further cash. Just a handful of waterlogged bills and a riddle that grew larger with every passing year. Even today, scholars revisit the Tena Bar discovery with fresh eyes, testing sediment samples, reanalyzing decay rates of rubber bands, even simulating river flows. Yet no consensus has emerged. The money remains a tantalizing breadcrumb, hinting at Cooper's fate, but refusing to tell the full story. 9 years after the jump, the legend had been refreshed, but the truth remained just as elusive. By the 1980s, the D.B. Cooper case had already shifted from an active manhunt into something larger myth. The FBI still kept files open, agents still followed leads, But the man in the suit and tie had slipped from being just a fugitive into being a folk hero. His leap into the stormy night had captured America's imagination, and no amount of unanswered questions could change that. Part of the legend lay in timing. The early 1970s were turbulent years in America. Vietnam still raged, distrust of government grew, and the era of hijackings had turned air travel into a strange theater of protest and crime. Against that backdrop, Cooper's act felt oddly stylish, even cinematic. He hadn't hurt anyone. He'd been polite, courteous, even offering drinks and reassurance. And then he disappeared, seemingly thumbing his nose at authority. In an age when institutions felt heavy and overbearing, Cooper looked like the man who beat the system. Books began to appear, each with a theory about who he really was. Documentaries followed, filled with grainy recreations of the jump-hushed voiceovers and dramatic music. Even songs were written, country ballads, folk tunes, rock riffs, all memorializing the gentleman hijacker. His name became shorthand for mystery, rebellion, and unsolved puzzles. Meanwhile, the FBI soldiered on. Over the years, more than 800 suspects were investigated. Some seemed promising: a career criminal here, a paratrooper there, even a man who boasted to friends about having pulled off the skyjacking. But every promising lead fell apart under scrutiny. Alibis checked out, DNA samples failed, handwriting didn't match. The Bureau grew frustrated, but the case file only grew thicker. Quirky detail: at one point, agents even tested cigarette butts left behind on the plane for DNA. They hoped modern science could do what manhunts had failed to. But time had degraded the evidence, and again the case stayed unsolved. Public obsession only deepened. Amateur sleuths pored over maps, calculating wind speeds and drift zones to guess where Cooper might have landed. Some swore he died in the forest. Others insisted he had lived a quiet life under a new name, maybe sipping whiskey in the very towns that once searched for him. Theories flourished, and the FBI found itself fielding tips for decades. Historians still argue about whether Cooper truly survived. The jump conditions were brutal, freezing air, strong winds, rough terrain. He wore only a business suit, loafers, and a trench coat, not gear for a paratrooper. Yet his precise instructions suggested experience. Could he have been a military man who calculated the risks and accepted them? Or was he a desperate dreamer doomed the moment he leapt? The absence of his body keeps both possibilities alive. In 2016, after 45 years of chasing ghosts, the FBI officially closed the case. They cited lack of evidence, lack of new leads, and the sheer impossibility of solving a crime with so little physical proof. To the Bureau, it was the end of the trail. To the public, it was the beginning of legend, cemented in history. Today, the name D.B. Cooper lives on far beyond FBI files. He's become a character in movies, a reference in TV shows, a symbol in pop culture. His face, reconstructed from witness sketches, appears on T-shirts, mugs, and posters. Festivals are held in his honor. Novels weave his story into fiction. Even skydiving clubs sometimes raise a toast to the man who leapt into eternity. Why does the story endure? Maybe because Cooper sits at the intersection of danger and mystery, crime and style. He was the hijacker who hurt no one, the outlaw who vanished without a trace. In a culture that loves rebels, Jesse James Bonney and Clyde, even modern anti-heroes, D.B. Cooper fits perfectly. He represents the possibility of outsmarting the system of disappearing when the world least expects it. And yet beneath the folklore the central question remains, who was he? A disgruntled veteran, a failed businessman, a daredevil with nothing left to lose? The answer has never come and perhaps never will. But maybe that's the point. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. They linger precisely because they refuse resolution, because the silence around them echoes louder than any conclusion could. So the legend of D.B. Cooper lives on half history, half myth, entirely American. One man, one briefcase, one stormy night, a leap into darkness and into immortality.